Tonight we're going to be journeying through the Old Testament, and if you want to go ahead and be opening up to Ezra chapter 1, in just a minute or just a second, Brother Doris Mann is going to open us in prayer, and then we will begin our journey tonight through many years of history. Brother Doris.
All wise and holy Father, our God in heaven, thank you for revealing yourself to us and how we will live to please thee, that we may spend eternity in heaven. Help us tonight and get valuable lessons from this lesson. See how you rule in the affairs of mankind. Help us always remember that you're in charge and you do what's right. You do what's best for us. Help us to be a blessing and help each other as we go through this journey together. That we can help each other live in such a way that we can all spend eternity together and be in heaven. Bless and be with us, and bless Kobe teachers. Okay? We give their thanks in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. So when we open up our Bibles to Ezra chapter 1 at verse 1, Ezra begins with this premise. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, so that he sent a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and also put in writing, saying. And then beginning in verse 2, you have the proclamation that Cyrus gives. Now, for many of us, when we open up our Bibles to the book of Ezra, we see this word, this man named Cyrus, king of Persia. You can commonly just start reading, and you can read through the text, and you don't have to know any of the history. But I tell you, if you're like I am, I really like to be able to know where I am standing. Because when we start walking in the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, we're walking in a very specific time frame. We're walking in a very specific time period of the Old Testament. So our objective tonight is just simply, and it's going to be very much more lecture. I hate that, but still yet, it's going to be much more of a historical lesson too. But hopefully bringing us up to where we are and why we are here in Ezra chapter 1. And then starting next week, if you'll look at your syllabus, starting next week, we'll be looking at the book of Ezra. Now, we're looking at this triplet of books. Ezra and Nehemiah is noted is commonly been used as one book, but because I was the teacher and I just kind of took the leeway to do this, what I want us to do is I want us to study these three books chronologically. So the way we're going to do it is we're going to study the first 6 chapters of Ezra, and once the temple's been rebuilt, we're going to leave the book of Ezra for a couple of weeks, and we're going to go to the book of Esther, and we're going to read through the book of Esther because that would have happened chronologically before Ezra chapter 7. And then we're going to come back to Ezra, we're going to read through the rest of Ezra, study through Ezra, and then finish out the quarter with Nehemiah. And at the very end of the year, I want to do 2 special lessons. And both of those lessons, again, one was going to be, well, both of them were going to be historical. But hopefully what my aim is to do in this class is to help us understand from the return of captivity to the New Testament times. Now, that's a lot of years. That's almost 1,000 years from the return all the way to the New Testament. But those last couple of classes, we're not going to be able to spend an crazy amount of time talking about the intertestamental period. We're just going to be like a rock skipping on the pond, just hitting a couple of the highlights, getting across through there. And then one of the last things, that the sects of Judaism, I just want to talk to you guys about where the Pharisees, Sadducees, Zealots, all of those various sects came from, specifically during the intertestamental period. So when we think about Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, here we have the king of Persia. And if you don't know anything else about this, you're probably already, you're thinking to yourself, well, why does the king of Persia have anything to do with Israel? And that brings us to that first question, and it's a very important question. Why was Israel taken into captivity? Why was Israel taken into captivity? What are some thoughts y'all have on that? They turned from God. Okay, what else do y'all know? It was prophesied. All right, let's go to Leviticus chapter 26. Leviticus chapter 26, remember with me, Moses is writing Leviticus from Mount Sinai. We are still within the first year of Israel's existence. They've come out of Egyptian bondage in Exodus chapter 13 and 14. They've crossed the Red Sea in chapter 14, 15. They praise God. They make it to Sinai in chapter 19. And when Moses writes this in Leviticus chapter 26, they're still at Mount Sinai in that first year. Now look at what Moses says to them beginning at verse 27 of Leviticus chapter 26. He says, "Yet if in spite of this you do not obey me, but act with hostility against me, then I will act with wrathful hostility against you. And I, even I, will punish you 7 times for your sins. Further, you will eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters you will eat. I will then destroy your high places and cut down your incense altars and heap your remains on the remains of the idols, for my soul shall abhor you. I will lay waste of your cities as well, and will make your sanctuaries desolate. I will not smell soothing aromas. I will make the land desolate, so that your enemies who settle in it will be appalled over it. You, however, I will scatter among the nations and will draw out a sword against you as your land becomes desolate and your cities become waste." There at the very dawn of their existence, God has already promised what? Israel. Punishment. If you turn, what did you say, Marcus? Invasion. If you turn away from me, if you disobey what it is that I've given you, you're going to be invaded, and you're ultimately going to be taken into captivity. Pestilence, famine, pestilence, the sword, all of those things. Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you think about Deuteronomy chapter 28, you're just jumping forward 40 years in Israel's history. You're going from Mount Sinai to the plains of Moab, and there Moses says the same warnings. And there he's even more specific. You are going to do this. You're going to have to be sent away. So when we open up our New Testament or our Old Testaments to Ezra chapter 1, what time period are we jumping into? We're jumping into that period in which they have been taken into Assyrian captivity. In 722 and 721 BC, the northern kingdom was taken into Assyrian captivity. The southern kingdom was taken into Babylonian captivity in a couple different waves, and we'll talk about those dates here in just a little while. But even though God has sent them into captivity, what still yet drives God's relationship with Israel at this point in time? Love of his people. God made 3 specific promises to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. Those 3 promises serves as the backbone of our entire Bible. The 3 promises are simply what? Land promise, seed promise, nation promise. Land, nation, seed. Let's go in that order. Or let's go nation, land, seed. All right, so when we journey through the Old Testament, what was the first of those 3 promises already fulfilled by God? The nation. When did Israel become a mighty and populous nation? In Egypt. Deuteronomy 26 and verse 5. So, God's covenantal relationship with Abraham and his descendants, that promise has been fulfilled. Now, let's move forward a little bit. The conquest of the land, and at the end of the conquest of the land in Joshua chapter 21 and verses 43 through 45, all the promises that God has made to our forefathers has been accomplished. God has given Israel the land. So the nation and the land promises both have been fulfilled, but what has not yet been fulfilled? The seed. So why does God continue to show long suffering? Why does God still love his people even when they were in captivity? To bring them back from captivity, what is God still having to work? The rest of the promises. He has to fulfill that 3rd promise. And them coming back to the land is absolutely important. It's impossible without them being there. Now, there's also some promises given to Moses. The promises given to Moses are that they are going to be a kingdom of priests. They were to be a light in the dark world that surrounded them. They were to influence their surrounding nations and proselyte them to become Jews. But knowing Israel's history, what did Israel do instead? Absolutely. Instead of bringing the Canaanites to the fold, they became like the Canaanites. And there's another reason. That's the major reason for them becoming into captivity. And then thirdly, there's a king in the United Kingdom. His name's David. Anybody know anything about David? Anybody ever heard anything about David? It's pretty important in the Old Testament, right? What specific promise was given to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7? His throne would be filled. Someone of his descendants, I'm going to give you a son, and he's going to sit on your throne, and his kingdom will last. His kingdom will be eternal. And that's something, again, that's not been fulfilled yet. David had a son. His name was Solomon. David had many sons. But Solomon failed. He was littered with flaws. But here we're still looking for the perfect, that which is to forthcome, and that is another promise that is here. Well, also, when you think about why does God bring them back from captivity? Because God promised that he would do exactly that. If you've got your Old Testaments, go with me to the book of Isaiah. I want us to just look at a couple of these things because I think it helps me ground myself with where I am in what we're talking about. Now, if I flash on the screen, a remnant will return. There's a name in the Old Testament that means exactly that. That name is what? Matt taught y'all Isaiah at the beginning of the year, so if y'all don't remember that, I'm going to tell Oglesby he failed as a teacher. I don't remember things 2 weeks ahead of time, but if you look in Isaiah chapter 7, and look with me at verse 3, the Lord said to Isaiah, "Go out and to meet Ahaz, you and your son Shear-Jashub, at the end of the conduit of the upper pool and on the highway to the fuller's field." Anybody got a footnote for Isaiah's son there? A remnant will return. Now, the northern kingdom is about to be taken into captivity because Ahaz is going to reign in about the 720s, and then Hezekiah would come in right there at the time that the northern kingdom's taken into Assyrian captivity. So even at that point in time, God's already telling Isaiah that there's going to be a remnant that is going to return. Now you turn just a couple pages over to Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10, primarily the first portion of Isaiah chapter 10 is that Assyria is going to be God's tool of judgment against Israel. But then, because they became so prideful and arrogant of themselves, what did God promise for Assyria? Woe to you, Assyria. I'm going to come against you too. But look with me in Isaiah chapter 10. Look with me beginning at verse 20. Now in that day, the remnant of Israel and those of the house of Jacob who have escaped will never again rely on the one who struck them, but will truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob to the mighty God. Again, this promise is made by God that the remnant is going to come back from captivity. He's not going to leave them there. And then finally, turn over to Isaiah chapter 11. Isaiah chapter 11, and Marcus, I'm going to recruit you to read for me verse 11 and verse 16 of Isaiah chapter 11.
In that day the Lord will extend his hand yet a second time to recover the remnant that remains of his people from Assyria, from Egypt, from Pathros, from Cush, from Elam, from Shinar, from Hamath, and from the coastlands of the sea. And there will be a highway from Assyria for the remnant that remains of his people, as it was for Israel when they came up from the land of Egypt.
there's something very important that Marcus just read in those two verses specifically. Did anybody catch it? God not only promises that there's going to be a remnant, but how will that remnant return? It will shadow what? The Exodus. You see, the remnant, the return from captivity, we really could name that second Exodus, because that's exactly what it is. And as we go ahead.
You also have that idea of Gentiles.
Absolutely. And that's a part of the remnant. Yeah, and that's a part of that idea that this return, it's not just for the Jews, it's also going to be extended to the Gentiles. We just studied that extensively out of the book of Romans. And that's a large part of what Paul argues throughout that book, is that the Gentiles was a part of this. But as you journey through Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, I really want you to pay attention to some of the things that happen, because some of the things that happen, specifically with the rebuilding of the second temple, there's a lot of shadows of the first temple. There's a lot of shadows that seemingly happen again in Old Testament history. And that's where we see history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it definitely rhymes. So we see that once again here. A couple other, and I may have these in your notes, but Jeremiah chapter 16 in verses 14 and 15, Jeremiah chapter 27, Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 7 and 8. Jeremiah 16, 14 and 15, Jeremiah 23, 7 and 8. In both of those places, Jeremiah speaks of the second Exodus. He speaks of Israel coming back as a second Exodus. Well, what this time period really proves to me, and Brother Mann mentioned it in his prayer, it proves to me that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind. You can't read the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther and understand it any other way. How else do you explain just the very beginning, what we've already read in Ezra 1 and verse 1? How do you explain how the king of Persia is so inclined to take care of the people of God? Why would that ever happen? God promised that it would happen, and God made it come about. Absolutely. Isaiah 44, 28, and then down in chapter 45, verses 1 and 2. Both places he's going to prophesy. But think about this, and I just mentioned a couple of these verses. Job chapter 42 and verse 2, y'all probably were there last week. In Job 42 and verse 2, what did Job say? I know that you can do all things and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. God is in control. In Psalm 115 and verse 3, but our God is in the heavens. He does whatever he pleases. In Psalm 135 and verse 6, whatever the Lord pleases, he does. In Proverbs 21 and verse 1, the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. And then you think about the book of Daniel. You know, Daniel is oftentimes when we think about the book of Daniel, we give Daniel 3 chapters. Daniel chapter 1, because we want to teach our young people that they need a purpose in their heart, how they're going to eat, dress, act in their day-to-day lives. Great observation, great lesson. Daniel chapter 3, we want our young people to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and that they're willing not to bend even when it means fire. And then Daniel chapter 6, right? But there's something else that's happening in the book of Daniel that is of great importance to us, especially when it comes not just to biblical history, but to world history. Because in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, who is the world leader at the time, the most powerful man in all of the realm of mankind, he has a dream. And in chapter 2, he has a dream, but when he awakes, he's done what? He's forgotten it. So he calls in all of his magical men into the kingdom. He calls them into the palace and he tells them, first off, you need to tell me what my dream is. Then you need to interpret my dream to me. And guess what all of them say? That's impossible, Nebuchadnezzar. We can't do that. Well, he gets angry with them, so he says, okay, if you can't do this, I'm going to tear you from limb to limb. That's exactly what he says to them. I will tear you from limb to limb. Okay? So Nebuchadnezzar says, I'm going to tear you limb to limb. All the wise men of the empire, if no one is able to do this for me, I'm going to kill you all. Well, the word spreads, Daniel hears about it. Immediately when Daniel hears about it, he goes to his companions, and he tells them, they pray about it, and guess what? God gives them the wisdom. God gives them the interpretation. Now, how many of you remember that dream in Daniel chapter 2? When Nebuchadnezzar, what did he see in Daniel chapter 2? He saw an image. It had a gold head, had that bronze chest, had the, was it iron, and then the iron and clay mixed at the feet, and then something else just comes and destroys the whole thing. So, what is it that Nebuchadnezzar saw? Well, Daniel told him. Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head. You are the gold. You are the one that starts. And then the inferior ones that come after you are going to be the Medo-Persian and the Greek Empire. And then after they disembark and break up, the Romans are going to come in, and they're going to be mightier than all of the other ones. But yet in the days of those kings, another king's going to come. And really what you have is Daniel's prophesying this to Nebuchadnezzar anywhere from early or late 500s to maybe, Nebuchadnezzar is going to reign until 562. So anywhere from 606 to 562, he's making this to Nebuchadnezzar, and he's telling him essentially the next 600 years of world history is transpiring in one night and in one dream. And that's important for us because, well, we'll talk about that in just a minute. But then also in Daniel chapter 7, just a few years later, about 40 years later, in the first year of Belshazzar, who would have been Nebuchadnezzar's great-grandson, grandson, depending on how you look at various things historically, still yet he's a family member on down the line. He's also the one that the kingdom's ultimately going to be taken from in 539 in chapter 5 of Daniel. But in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel received a vision. And in that vision, he saw these creatures. He saw a lion and a bear and a leopard and then a beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. And if you read Daniel chapter 7, you probably think that you skipped over to the book of Revelation because it's very highly figurative and a lot of things are going on. But what Daniel's importance for us is that what Daniel proves is that even in the time in which Israel is in captivity, who is in control? God is. I can only imagine, and if you go and you read the book of Daniel, if you go and read the book of Ezekiel especially, both of those prophets did not understand the will of God. They didn't understand why this was happening. They didn't understand, well, they may have understood why, but they don't understand all the details because they were men living in the moment. But what Daniel relates to us multiple times, and it's not even Daniel who says this, but in Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar says, I know that the Most High is ruler over the realm of mankind. Nebuchadnezzar came to that realization. Well, all of this talk about the Babylonians, but who took the Israelites into captivity? The Assyrians. Well, what happened to the Assyrians? What happened to the Assyrians? Well, the Assyrians had ups and downs throughout their history. One of the most important down periods is probably around 760 to about 740 BC. 760 to 740 BC, the Assyrians kind of go through a little bit of a lull during that period. That's also the time period that more than likely Jonah goes to Nineveh and preaches to them to repent from their evil deeds. And it's also at that time that Jeroboam II is reigning in Israel. And if you were to classify or summarize Jeroboam II's reign in one word, how would you describe it? Prosperous? Prosperous. Absolutely, Brother Floyd. Jeroboam II in Israel's history, the northern kingdom's history, was the most prosperous of all the kings. But in their prosperity, did they turn back to God? Go read the book of Amos. They didn't. They're evil. All of the sins that they had already been committing, they continued to commit, and that's why God sent Isaiah. That's why God sent Amos. That's why God sent Micah. That's why God sent Hosea. He sent his prophets at this time. But also then in Assyria's history, we drop down from the 740s down to the 720s. Well, Shalmaneser V, he is the one who comes against Samaria in 722 and takes Israel into captivity. And just a couple of years later, Sennacherib is going to come back to the land of Israel, and he is the one who's going to try to attack Jerusalem. And Hezekiah is king at this time. And how successful was that venture? It went well, but it ended poorly. He conquered a lot of kings. He conquered a lot of cities. But at the end, the Lord said, not even an arrow will be shot against this city. And that night, 185,000 of his army was killed by one angel. Well, from that point onward, really, Assyria begins to just drop further and further away. By the time that you look at, I'm not even going to try these names. I thought the names in Romans 16 were hard. These names are even more difficult for me. But still yet, the Assyrians continue to fall away. They have a couple of more good kings. They have one more great king after all of these different episodes. But ultimately, Nabopolassar comes about. And Nabo, I'm just going to call him that. He was the first one of the Persians that was able to unite the tribes together, and he went up against the Assyrians. And in 612, he took Nineveh. And after he took Nineveh in 612, he turned his eyes to other things, and he continued to conquer, ultimately until he was the one who was in firm control of the world. And then he died, and Nabo's son is Nebuchadnezzar. And do we know that name? Yeah, because that's the one that we meet in the Old Testament more than any other foreign king. So what happened to the Assyrians? They had their day in the limelight, and then just as God promised them that he would judge them in Isaiah chapter 10, God brought that judgment against them. Well, what are some important dates of the Old Testament? These things may not be in your notes, but these are just some important dates that you can take note of. In 2166, you have the birth of Abraham. That's going all the way back to, and again, that's circumspection to a certain extent to be so definitive on that. But generally speaking, around 2166 is when Abraham is born. The first major important date, for me at least, in the Old Testament is always going to be the Exodus. Around 1446 to 1440 BC is the time of the Exodus. And of course, if you go 40 years later, you have the 40 years of wilderness wanderings, and then approximately about 7 to 8 years, maybe just a few more years than that, for the conquest and the division of the land. And then beginning in 1389 all the way through until 1050 BC, for a period of about 350 years, you have the period of the Judges. And we studied that together on Wednesday evenings. I think it was either last year or the year before. I do know that we studied the book of Judges together in the past couple of years. But there's the period of the Judges. Well, in 1050, Samuel is the final judge, and Samuel's not going to appoint his sons because they were wicked. So God said to him what? The people called for what? Give us a king. And that's exactly what God allowed them to have. He gave them a king. And then it just fits so nicely because that first 3 reigns are all 40-year reigns. You have the reign of Saul, 1050 to 1010, 1010 to 970 David, 970 to 930 Solomon. There you have all of those. There we go. That is. but it's close enough. You could definitely get by with those 3 days, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000. All right, from there, from 930, of course, y'all, we know the story. We know what happens. Rehoboam and Jeroboam, they divide. So we have the divided kingdom from 930 to 721 BC or 722 BC. What's a year when we're talking about 3,000 years ago anyways? So we have that divided kingdom. During this time period, you have the northern kingdom of Israel, and something that we emphasize to the kids in Bible drill, how many good kings did they have? In the northern kingdom, none. That's the easiest answer all night. None, 0. They have all bad kings. Every single one of the kings of the kings of the northern kingdom followed after the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat. Every single one of them. So that takes us to 722, and then the Assyrians come in and take the northern kingdom into Assyrian captivity, and that leaves you, if you know the hand motions, Judah alone. And if you don't know the hand motions, ask one of the kids around here. They'll probably teach you that. All right, so you have the Judah alone. Judah's going to make it for a few more years, but Judah's going to be just as wicked and more wicked than even her sister Israel. But there's a lot of things that begin to transpire between 721 and 586. Well, first, in 612 BC, you have the fall of Nineveh. And now you go from the Assyrian Empire to the Babylonian Empire. In 606, you have the Battle of Carchemish, and it's when Nebuchadnezzar is coming back from that battle that he makes his journey into Jerusalem for the first time. And in 606 BC, that is when Nebuchadnezzar sets siege to the city the first time, and he takes that first set of captives back to Babylon. And that's where you have Daniel and his 3 companions. And that's, yes, the 70 years of captivity has begun at this point in time, 606. So you have the 606, and I can't remember, I don't think I had that there. So that you have the first waves taken in 606. Nebuchadnezzar has a couple other battles. He ultimately comes back to Jerusalem in 597. When he comes back to Jerusalem the second time, he takes a wave of about 1,000 wise men. And one of those that he takes away in that second wave is Ezekiel. And Ezekiel and all of his prophecy and his entire book is written from Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel and Daniel are both prophets of exile. And then Nebuchadnezzar is ultimately going to come back a third time, and the third time he's not going to be as nice because he is tired of these Israelites. He's tired of those who are living in Jerusalem. They've promised multiple times, we'll pay. They don't pay. They continue to rebel. So in 586, guess what Nebuchadnezzar does? He squashes it. He burns it down, and he's done with it. Nebuchadnezzar comes in. The city is laid to waste. Now we are into the period of the Babylonian captivity. Well, just like with the Assyrians, the Babylonians begin to sway at this time. Nebuchadnezzar dies, and his son is brought in, and then his son reigns just for a couple of years to be assassinated by his brother-in-law. His brother-in-law is going to reign just a couple of years, and then he's going to be assassinated, and then another one's going to come in, and he's going to be assassinated, and Nabonidus is finally going to come in, and he's going to reign, and he's going to be so busy fighting in various places based upon what at least I've read, or what at least I know about this time frame. Nabonidus is out battling. Well, a king needs to be sitting on the throne. His son, Belshazzar, is who he leaves behind to reign on the throne. And that's who is in control in 539 when the Persians set their eyes on Babylon and take it in Daniel chapter 5. So all of that is transpiring at this time too, and that brings us to 539 in Cyrus's decree. 539 in Cyrus's decree, this is what allows the Israelites to return back from Babylonian captivity. Well, when you look at the Babylonians, the Babylonians are gone now. Now we're looking at the Medo-Persian Empire. Persian Empire, you're going to have Cyrus, you're going to have Cambius, then you're going to have Darius. Darius is going to be the next important guy that we probably talk about lengthy, or at least more than others. Darius is the one who you read about in Daniel chapter 6 in the lion's den, Darius. And then also Daniel chapter 9, Daniel chapters 11 and 12 are all written during the reign of Darius. And then after Darius the first, you have Xerxes. And Frank and I were talking about Xerxes, and he could probably tell you a whole lot more about him. So if you have any questions, ask Frank. He's the historian. I'm not. But Xerxes is the one, he's also known in the Bible as Ahasuerus, who is going to be the husband of who? Esther. So he's going to play a major role in everything that we study this quarter. Ahasuerus or Xerxes. And then Xerxes' son, or at least the next one in command, is Artaxerxes, and he is going to reign from 465 to 425. Why do you know the name Artaxerxes? You may not know Artaxerxes, but you do know one of his cupbearers, Nehemiah. So here's another case in point. So we have all of these things happening. Well, in 539, you have Cyrus decrees to go back and to build the temple, and we'll talk about all of these things next week, in the next couple of weeks. But the temple ultimately is going to be built in 520 to 516. After that, you have Ezra's return in 457. That's one of the reasons we're going to study this chronologically, because between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7, there's a period of about 70 years that transpires between the building of the temple to Ezra's return in 457. Well, in the midst of that 70 years is when Esther is dealt with. So we're going to read Esther at that point in time. After Ezra's return in 445 BC, you have Nehemiah returns to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And then finally, in 432 BC, we have Malachi, the final prophet. That pretty much gives us the lay of the land. Iran?
Yeah.
Iran? I was just thinking of just where it was geographically. Because it's a little bit further, because if we're looking at Babylon, we're looking at Iraq. And of course, we're going a little bit further to the east for us to get to Iran and to where Persia, Susa, the capital of Persia, would have been. Well, you've got the liberal theologians, what they've done with Isaiah is they've made Isaiah into 3 books. And every one of the books has to be written a whole lot later than it originally was. But they have to, so they'll give you the first 30, they'll give you the first 30-something chapters will be written by actually Isaiah. And if y'all haven't done any of those readings, I really don't suggest you do any of that reading. But that's where the Dead Sea Scrolls was an absolute gold mine for us to be found. Because in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we found the entirety of the Isaiah scroll. And what we saw is that all this mumbo-jumbo about liberal theologians, is that it just doesn't, their evidence does not weigh that heavily against what we have evidence-wise. So let's look at just the 3 books. And when we talk about introductions to these 3 books, this is the briefest introductions I've ever made to 3 books. All this other stuff was that's just how my brain works. I love the history of it. I like knowing where I am when I step into the Bible. That's one of the reasons I press on those kids. And if y'all don't know your 17 time periods, I implore you to learn them. Because if you know your 17 time periods and you know the scriptural limitations of those 17 time periods, you really know where you are when you're walking through the Bible. And you don't get lost so easily. But that's one of the reasons I just did everything that I've done so far tonight. So the next couple of slides are just going to be the basic overviews of just looking at the 3 books themselves, making a couple points. Any points, or was that a buzzer? Okay, I'm just hearing things. I guess John was faking me out of there. All right, so when we think about the book of Ezra, Who is its author? Probably, that's if that was the $1 million question, I would ask both of you, do you want to use your lifeline? Okay, that was a buzzer. Okay, I heard it that time. All right, so Ezra is the writer. More than likely, and this is tentatively where I am, I tend to look at Ezra being the writer of 1st and 2nd Chronicles too. And there's a lot of similarities between some of these books that really lends itself to Ezra being the chronicler. Now, I'm not going to be dogmatic about that, but still, yeah, Ezra wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and it just so fits that he would have written this book also because he's writing the history of Israel. So Ezra is the author. When you think about the date of the book, well, it had to have been written after Ezra came back in 457, 458. It has to be written after that. So we're probably looking in the 450s time period. The language of the book, I don't have this on the screen, but Ezra's book has some similarities to Daniel because Daniel, the greater majority of the book of Daniel is not written in Hebrew, but it's written in Aramaic. And the same thing is found in the book of Ezra. There's a lot of places. There's a few different places. Ezra 4, beginning at verse 7, down through chapter 6 and verse 18, and then again in chapter 7 and verses 12 through 26. All of those are found only in Aramaic. Those were more than likely have been written originally in Aramaic, not in the Hebrew. When you think about the purpose of the book, and I gave you a lengthy paragraph there from Kiel and Dietzlich. Hopefully, I'm probably messing their names up too, but that's old commentary set. But I thought that their purpose, their summary statement about Ezra, I thought was quite fitting. When you think about major characters in Ezra, of course, you have Zerubbabel, who is going to be the leader of the first journey back, Joshua, who's going to be that first high priest that comes back, and then Ezra is going to be the three major characters. And when we look at the basic outline, just go chapters 1 through 6, rebuilding the temple, chapters 7 through 10, reforming the community, restoring temple worship and temple things. That's essentially what the book of Ezra is about. When we look at the book of Nehemiah, same things. We just put them up there real quick and just march through them. When you think about Nehemiah, who is the author? Quite possibly it's Ezra. Ezra could have been the one who wrote this one too. It could have been Nehemiah. Nehemiah could have wrote it. It doesn't matter either way. Nehemiah, the date in which it would have been written, it would have been written after the fact that he did all of these things. So it would have been written up to probably 430 BC at the latest. Major characters, Nehemiah, of course, is the major character. Sanballat was just one of the enemies, but Sanballat seems to be a major enemy of Nehemiah. And when you look at the basic outline, you have the rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls, you have the hearing and doing the law, and then a couple of reforms that Nehemiah brings about toward the end. I skipped purpose. The purpose of Nehemiah was first and foremost is to rebuild those walls. That's what is the major thrust of his book. And then when you think about the book of Esther, yes. Yes, and so
their numbers, they didn't have 39 books in the Old Testament.
No, so
Their numbering system's not like
well, so the Hebrews were so fit to everything being acrostic, everything fitting 22.
Chronicles was
Chronicles. So
including Kings.
yes, so if you take the Jewish Bible has 22 books. A lot of our English Bibles then would be not separate, but they would be combined in the Jewish Bible. Because, again, the Jews wanted 22 for everything. That's why acrostic psalms, so many things that the Jews, and you find it throughout the Old Testament where 22 things are used all the time is a way of memorization for them. But yes, for the greater majority of the time, really not until the 3rd or 4th century AD, we're talking about 1,600 years from us. No, we're not going 3,000, just 16. That's when Ezra and Nehemiah started to be separate in the Latin translations of the Old Testament, the Greek translations. So that's when the separation began to start happening. When we think about the book of Esther, the author, again, I gave you some of the suggestions that Some people say that Esther was written not by any one particular man, but that it was written by the great synagogue, and essentially the one who brought about the great synagogue, based upon what I've read, is Ezra himself. So it still would make sense that Ezra's the writer. The biggest thing about the peculiarity of the book, who's not in the book of Esther? Who's never mentioned? God's never mentioned specifically, but who can you not miss? God. God is throughout the book. And then I give you the basic outline, I believe, in your notes too. Any comments, observations? All right. Next week, Brother David Wilson will be taking you through the first 3 chapters of the book of Ezra. I will be in South Alabama in a gospel meeting. I will be back after that, and then I'll miss one other class, but we're here for the duration. I hope that you're anticipating, looking forward to the study as I am. Thank you so much.
First song be number 70, Mansion Over the Hilltop. I'm satisfied.
We'll be there in just a second. So several weeks ago, Brother Matt preached a sermon, and it was just simply titled, Be Better. And there was a point to me in that lesson that really stuck out to me. And it was be better at limiting my exposure to evil influences. And it really stuck out to me because it seems like everywhere we go and everything we look at, there's some sort of evil. Whether it's at school or at work, at the store, on social media, on the news, just everywhere we look, there seems to be some sort of evil. And sadly, we're not going to be able to completely avoid that evil. But what we can do is we can try our best to stay away from it, and we can limit our exposure to it. So tonight, I just want to look at some verses through the book of Proverbs that deal with this certain topic. Look with me in Proverbs 1 and in verse 15. It says, "My son, do not walk on the way with them. Keep your feet from their path." So we don't need to surround ourselves with evil influences. We don't need to walk with those who practice evil. Now, if you will turn over to chapter 4. Just a few pages over to chapter 4 and look in verse 25. And I'll read through verse 27. Proverbs 4:25. "Let your eyes look directly ahead, and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you. Watch the path of your feet, and all your ways will be established. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and turn your foot from evil." So again, just kind of that same point, stay away from evil. Now if you will look with me in chapter 13. Chapter 13, and we're going to be looking at verse 20. Proverbs 13, verse 20. "One who walks with wise people will be wise, but a companion of fools will suffer harm." So those are just a few verses in Proverbs, but as a very common theme, and I believe that theme is just to stay away from evil, don't walk with those who practice evil. So in my mind, I think, okay, stay away from evil. But then I think, how do I stay away from evil? And I think that the way to stay away from evil, and based on reading scripture, it's just to simply walk in the path of righteousness and to keep your eyes on God. So if you will, go back with me to Proverbs chapter 4. Back to Proverbs 4. And this time, if you will, look with me in verse 18. Proverbs 4 and verse 18 says, "But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, that shines brighter and brighter until the full day." So this calls us to walk in the path of the righteous because it shines brighter. And it goes on in verse 19, it says, "The way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know over what they stumble." So it's very important that we walk in the path of righteousness. And then go down with me and we'll read verse 25 again. "Let your eyes look directly ahead and let your gaze be fixed straight in front of you." So, one, we need to walk in the path of righteousness, and two, we need to keep our eyes on God. Keep our eyes ahead of us, looking toward the goal that we're pursuing. Now, if you will, lastly, go to Proverbs 21. Proverbs 21, and we'll look at verse 21. So we understand that we need to stay away from evil, and we understand how. So what do we get for staying away from evil? What is our reward? Proverbs 21:21 says, "One who pursues righteousness and loyalty finds life, righteousness, and honor." So if we pursue righteousness and we keep our eyes on God, then we can have eternal life. So tonight, if you have allowed evil to creep into your heart or into your life, whether it be at school or work or through news and social media or even at the store, if you've allowed evil to creep into your heart and to your life, you can start by making that right tonight and removing the evil in your life as we stand and sing.